There's a type of exhaustion that doesn't show up in tests, doesn't disappear with the weekend, and doesn't improve with vacations. A silent psychological exhaustion that slowly seeps into your routine and makes you believe the problem is the outside world. Too much work, too many responsibilities, too many demands. But what if I told you that true exhaustion doesn't come from what you do, but from what you think? Perhaps that's the most uncomfortable part of this story. Because no one taught us to recognize when the mind crosses the healthy boundary and begins, discreetly, to make the body sick. You're not tired because you work too much. You're tired because you think too much. And nobody taught you how to stop. The worst part is that this happens so normally that it almost seems like a virtue. Thinking a lot is seen as a sign of intelligence, awareness, and responsibility. But there's an invisible line between thinking and ruminating, between reflecting and becoming imprisoned. And almost nobody notices when they cross it. Excessive thinking doesn't shout, doesn't make noise, doesn't call attention. It whispers, it occupies, it consumes, and when you realize it, you're already living more inside your head than in your own life. Overthinking is an invisible illness precisely because it happens in the place where everything seems safe, the mind. It doesn't hurt like a wound, it doesn't bleed like a cut. It simply creates scenarios that don't exist, dialogues that never happened, problems that may never come. The mind begins to rehearse life instead of living it. Every conversation is repeated, every decision is analyzed, every possibility is explored to exhaustion. And this seems practical, conscious, even intelligent. But in reality, it's anxiety disguised as control. The body, however, doesn't understand philosophical concepts. It can't differentiate between a real danger and an imagined one. For the nervous system, an intense thought is an event. A scenario created in the mind generates the same chemical reaction as a concrete threat. The heart races, the muscles contract, breathing shortens. The body enters a state of constant alert, as if it were always about to face something. But that something never arrives. And even so, the body doesn't relax. That's when the silent signs appear. The constant tension in the shoulders, jaw, and neck. The tiredness without apparent reason, even after sleeping. The difficulty in switching off at night when the body asks for rest, but the mind insists on continuing. The feeling of always being switched on, always alert, always on standby. As if relaxing were dangerous, as if stopping meant losing control. All of this accumulates day after day, almost imperceptibly, until it becomes a permanent state. There is something profoundly poetic and tragic about this. The body living through a war that only exists in your head, a war against imaginary scenarios, against futures that don't yet exist, against versions of yourself that may never become real. And while this battle happens in silence, you keep functioning. You work, you talk, you smile, you produce. On the outside, everything seems normal. Inside, something is always tense. And perhaps the most dangerous thing isn't the tiredness itself, but the illusion that it's normal, that it's just how it is, that overthinking is part of who you are. But there's a deeper layer to this story, something almost no one tells you about excessive thinking, something that not only tires you out, but also distances you from your own life without you even realizing it. And that's exactly where this conversation starts to get even more serious. When thought takes center stage in your life, something subtle begins to happen. You drift away from the present moment without realizing it. It's not an abrupt departure, but a slow, almost elegant detachment. You remain physically present, but internally, you're always a few steps ahead, anticipating, predicting, analyzing. The mind begins to live in the future or revisit the past, while the body remains here, waiting. And this disconnection creates a silent noise between what you feel and what you think. That's when life begins to lose texture, depth, presence. Overthinking convinces you that feeling is risky. The more you think, the less you feel. The less you feel, the less you live. Direct experience is replaced by interpretations, judgments, mental narratives. A simple moment ceases to be lived and becomes evaluated. A conversation ceases to be felt and becomes analyzed. Silence ceases to be rest, and becomes discomfort. The mind occupies so much space that there is no presence left for the now, and the now is the only place where life truly happens. There's a very deep psychological belief behind all this, almost never questioned. The idea that thinking more prevents suffering, as if anticipating scenarios, predicting problems, and rehearsing responses were a form of conscious protection. The mind creates this illusion of control to try to keep you safe. If I think about everything, nothing will surprise me. If I prepare mentally, I won't suffer. But this logic comes at a high price, because excessive thinking doesn't eliminate future pain. It only creates constant pain in the present. Gradually, you begin to live in a state of vigilance, always attentive, always alert, always trying to adjust reality before it happens. This seems practical, rational, even mature, but in practice, it's an internal imprisonment. Overthinking doesn't protect, doesn't solve, doesn't liberate. Overthinking imprisons. It imprisons vital energy, spontaneity, the ability to simply be. And the most curious thing is that the more you try to control life with your mind, the further you distance yourself from life. There's a subtle moment when consciousness can turn the key. It's not when you solve everything, understand everything, or organize all your thoughts. It's when you realize you don't need to chase after every thought that arises. This is a philosophical and practical point at the same time. Peace doesn't come when you solve everything in your mind. It comes when you stop getting lost in it. When you realize that thoughts are fleeting events, not orders. They appear, they make noise, but they don't need to be followed. At this point, something begins to change in your internal experience. You notice that the mind can speak, and you may not respond. That a thought can arise, and you may not continue the conversation. This is not repression. It is not struggle. It is not denial. It is conscious observation. Minimalist, aesthetic, silent. When you realize you are overthinking, you don't need to correct anything. Just return. Return to your breath. Feel the air going in and out. Feel the weight of your body, the contact with the ground, the texture of the moment. This return to the body is profoundly psychological and profoundly poetic, because the body is never in the future. It is never in the past. The body is always here. Feeling the body is a direct way to escape mental prison without creating another prison. It's not about stopping thinking, but about not being dragged along. Thoughts pass. You don't need to go with them. This simple awareness, when lived practically and consistently, begins to restore presence to your life. Over time, you realize something almost forgotten. The present moment is not threatening. It is silent, simple, sufficient. The mind said it was dangerous to stop, but the body shows that it is safe to be. And this perception changes the way you relate to everything. To work, to people, to silence, to yourself. Life ceases to be a problem to be solved and becomes an experience to be lived again. If this makes sense to you, write in the comments, "I'm returning to the present moment." Or comment, "Overthinking tires me out," if you recognized yourself at any point. And if you want, also share a word that defines how your mind usually feels. Raced, anxious, stuck, tired. I rate everything. Because this conversation doesn't end here. It only begins when you truly realize where you've been living all this time.